Naology, it's the study of sacred buildings. John Dudley has written a book on this. It's one of a few that deal with this particular topic, and I think it's become a little bit outdated. It's still an excellent source to look into. In this particular video, I'm going to have a look around the State Library of New South Wales here in Sydney and examine some of the points, and these buildings speak only if you're willing to listen and know the particular language that they use. Public Library of New South Wales, as it's printed now, it's just generally referred to as the State Library of New South Wales building, but there are a few, more than a few, some very interesting points in regards to this building and into the broader topic. As Scott Onstott says, secrets in plain sight. These buildings are written according to a very specific language, a very ancient language. It's written in stone. It's written in stone for the ages, and it carries quite a bit of knowledge. Now, one of the immediate points to reference from here are the columns. They are Ionic order columns, and even the sides of them are important. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. They're effectively linked to Acanthus, which is very much underrated, very little talked about topic that joins all. It's a fundamental in naology, in this area of study. But out the front we have these lamps. Now we had the meander pattern around the bottom, but the lamps have this particular leaf decoration, and that is an acanthus plant. Very important. I've been talking about that in especially some recent videos, and in the future I'm going to get into that in much more detail. It's very, very ancient, going back to ancient Sumer and Egypt. But we have that meander pattern, and there are some, again, this is an ancient decoration system, but especially connected with the acanthus plant and the acanthus leaf, and again it's an ancient connection. If you look back at Jean Le Pautrot and the Decorator's Handbook, become popularized in the late 1700s, early hundreds. Their books describe this, but this in itself is an acanthus plant as seen in Hyde Park in Sydney. Throughout Sydney, where this particular sacred architecture and sacred places connected to very important people, you will see that the acanthus is grown or allowed to be grown, even though it's non-native, because it's very important, it's very symbolic, and it has very deep connections. Now, for instance, in America especially, but across the world, the connection between acanthus and Masonic lodges, even Masonic books, decorations will have this acanthus design, very much connected to the Corinthian order of architecture, which again is one of these standard symbols on Mason tracing boards: Doric, Ionic and Corinthian, and Corinthian is based on the acanthus leaf. The lamps at the front of the State Library have the acanthus, but this meander pattern as well, and the meander itself will also be connected to another very important and now very controversial decoration form, and that is the filfot, or the many other names for it, but everyone would effectively know it as the swastika. So the acanthus, the meander and the swastika, as I'll show, have ancient connections that are still in use today, such as the Mint building. The lamp there as well has the meander pattern, but with the swastikas at the corner and the acanthus leaf on there. So again, it's just one of these symbols that we'll see, but it's this connection between the meander pattern and the swastika can also be seen in Sydney. I showed it in some earlier videos, such as Customs House by James Barnet, one of the key architects. We see the meander, but also the swastika there in smaller print. Now back to the State Library. So we have the main entrance and the columns and the lamps there with the meander and the acanthus connection. And now, well, the State Library of New South Wales, as it's now known, the building itself says the Public Library of New South Wales. And well, the statues around the building are also very important, and I won't go into each one individually, but there is one very specific, very important one where we see here on the Macquarie Street. That's Macquarie Street, Sydney, named after Lachlan Macquarie, at 66 feet wide. It's one of those, the measures hidden in plain sight once more. There's also two sculptures of Macquarie on Macquarie Street, and one of them again has his acanthus connection, but I won't show that for the moment because I want to have a look at Matthew Flinders. The grandfather of Matthew Flinders Petrie, he's a Mason, but he was also a very famous navigator and cartographer. he is the one who gave Australia its name. So, for instance, the map that he drew, the first true map of Australia, Terra Australis or Australia, he was a Freemason. The governor, Lachlan Macquarie, used these maps and started referring to Australia in his dispatches as the name. So instead of being New South Wales, the name Australia began to stick. So it was through these two men that Australia got its name. But another important point in regards to especially Freemasons. So Scottish Rite, we have 33 levels, so 32 open and a 33rd by invitation only. So let's just for the moment describe that as 32 around the 33rd, because the map by Matthew Flinders, it includes not only the straight up and down lines, longitudinal, latitude lines that we have now, but it also is one of the last uses of the Portolan mapping system, where we have these 32 point lines, so 32 around the 33rd. This is a common symbol throughout, but it's an ancient system of mapping, and also many connections to surveying, mapping, and all these things to do, especially with measurement. But Matthew Flinders, just as out of interest, there's also a little sculpture behind him, and that is of his cat Trim, who went with him on most of his journeys around Australia as he was creating this series of maps, which was eventually to lead to Australia having the name that it does now. And also the Mitchell wing there. Now we have these columns. Now they're not true Ionic columns. Sometimes we'll just call them neo-Ionic columns, but even though they're a slight difference from a true Ionic, they're essentially still under that Ionic banner of architecture. But the true Ionic column, as we see at the front here, they do not point out at the corners. They're generally flat and parallel. So now as we approach, about to enter, we have the doors here. Now they have multiple doors, and most of them have pictures of the native Australians and their lifestyle. It's despite common belief, especially the ones around Sydney, the indigenous people did have villages and what we describe as permanent settlements. So they and here shows some. Well, anyway, that's a separate topic, but there's another one of these key doors has these key figures such as La Perouse, but most importantly John Oxley and Hamilton Hume. There are other ones, but more often than not, again, these gentlemen depicted here are connected to exploring, surveying, they're Freemasons. Now the door, we also have these griffins here, and with the lamp, and we'll go into that a little bit deeper, but just to freeze on that picture. So we have the scroll work coming out, and we also have the griffins, or the hybrid type of animals. And there's a nice little reference also to the lamp on the seal of the library itself, the light, illumination, and more. On the floor of the library as you enter, you have this Tasman map, and again, many little important symbols that would be easily overlooked, but there's a language in here as well. And as with all these things, it's a matter of having a classical education, as in that we have multiple schools. Now in the modern day we tend to specialize, and different fields of study don't cross, but these things cannot be understood unless you have something of a broad understanding of what might just be called the seven liberal arts, especially the quadrivium: astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, and music. And underneath them, what's joined by them is the concept of navigation, of a clock and of a compass, measurement, very important. But the map itself is also a description of a Portolan mapping system. So the 32 rays around the 33rd central point, as with Flinders map and as with ancient maps, including the Perry-Rees map, which have the coast of America, Africa and Antarctica in very high detail, hundreds of years before they were officially discovered. But also here, so on the Tasman map on the floor of a state library, we have references to the compass, to measurement, and many other important cartographical map making, the 32-point rows, and there's also sort of a little fleur-de-lis sort of symbol there, but I won't go into that's too broad of a topic. But the 32-point rows. Also interesting to notice that this was before Australia was officially mapped, so Tasmania was considered part of a mainland, and Australia was thought to connect to New Guinea and the islands up there in that part of the world. But it also, well, again, multiple references, but at each of the four corners we also have these cherub type figures that represent the four winds, but more than that they also represent the four elements and many other connections. But here again I see references to astronomy, the cross staff, which is a symbol connected often with an instrument that's often connected with Edmund, the inventor of the so-called inventor of the 66-foot chain. We also see these cherubs around the compass. So measurement, astronomy, and just that whole general area, as well as the elementals there. On the inside of the door we have again that same picture of the griffins, the lamp, and this plant scrollwork, which is in itself is acanthus. I'll show that in a little moment. But around the main entry here, now you'll notice the columns and the colonnades, so those column type things which are built into the wall. They are of the Corinthian school of architecture, which is based on the acanthus plant. I've done some videos and I'll try to remember to include the link to show you the connections and the history there. It goes back to ancient Greece, but the symbolism is again so much which is Greek was absorbed from earlier cultures, including Sumer and Egypt. The corbels here as well, so these we see, well, again it's an acanthus plant, but because again usually when it's in stone the pointy sharp corners of an actual acanthus leaf have to be leveled down a little bit, because the stonework will, it's hard to do in stone. When it's done in metal it's usually done quite accurately because it's easier to have those corner points there. But so the columns throughout the rest of the decorations. Now it's also these Corinthian columns are the most elaborate, most expensive to create as well. So they have symbolic value, but it's also a bit of a statement to use the Corinthian order, because it's saying you really have a level of skill and of resources available to you to create these, as where Ionic and Doric are much simpler and cheaper to build. But also Corinthian, Doric and Ionic are also the three main pillars, columns used in esoteric schools, especially, as I refer to most often, Freemasonry, but not exclusive to Freemasonry, of course. It's just under the general banner of occult or esoteric, as in to be initiated into levels of knowledge. There's also a nice little inscription there: "In book lies the soul of the whole past time, the articulate, audible voice of the past, when the body and material substance of it has altogether vanished like a dream." So even the concept of naology, sacred buildings, major public buildings, libraries, churches, town halls, these types of buildings are very important, and it's symbolically they need to have these things in there because they're built for the ages. I also have the balustrades up there as well, have this acanthus design in there. Now as we enter the main hall in the library, there's a few, well not a few, many references, but I won't go of course into all of them, just a quick overview of the main points. And so here above the clock now we have winged lions, and they're actually touching a lamp as well. Now the lion and the griffin and these hybrid animals are a common theme. Now you might even notice along the top there we have griffins and the lamp and some acanthus scrolling, and I'll highlight that in a moment here. But so as we move up, and as we see up here, and where we have the griffins, the lamp and acanthus scrolling, as well as rosettes. But just as we had on the door at the front, here we have again a slight variation of that same pattern, but it's essentially we're being told the same story. Acanthus scrolling. That's actually a crater jar, which again is very much connected to the Corinthian order. But now in regards to the ancient origins, this is the temple of Antonius and Faustina in Rome. Now the decorations are above the columns, as you can see here. There's a depiction, the top one is a depiction to explain how, even because it's been damaged over time, but we have the griffins and the acanthus scrolling. Here's another picture of a carving which has again the griffin, the tail has acanthus scrolling, and the pattern directly around that is also acanthus leaves as well. Now the connection between acanthus The Griffin is one which goes through. So, for instance, we see the drawing on the left is a more modern one, but it's in London, and it's in the ancient world, but it's also elsewhere here in Sydney. And again, I'll just show like a depictions. I think this is Jean Lepetre's from his handbook, which shows the acanthus scroll work, and it's not directly connected with Griffins, but just to show how this dominates so much of not only the relatively modern world, but also going back in the ages. Again, another page from this is the Decorator's Handbook, and just again to show the acanthus scroll. So it's not, you might not connect, if you look at a acanthus plant, you wouldn't directly connect it to there, but it has been, and there's more than enough documentation to show that. So elsewhere in Sydney, I had a quick view at it in a recent video. The fountain, Arethusa Aquarius fountain next to St Mary's Church, acanthus, Corinthian columns, and also this hybrid griffin with its acanthus tail around the outside. As I said, this is an ancient symbol, so we have here the acanthus column, or the dancers at Delphi, three ladies, coincidentally, that's an important point, but also the acanthus leaf scroll work there. The Greco-Roman world is full of references to the swastika, the acanthus, and to the griffins, and one of the most important is the use of Apollo symbolism and Apollo story in the golden age of Apollo in Rome and Greece. But for instance, we have this tripod, it's in the one of the Vatican museums, but we have the griffin and the Ionic columns, also have Medusa head, but we have the griffin, acanthus scrolling, and the swastika, and this is a constant reference which goes around. Now we also have Apollo's chariot will various forms, various different depictions, but we'll typically have 4 hybrid winged horses, but also sometimes griffins. But while in other depictions of Apollo's chariot, as we'll see now, also the 4 horsemen I think is the most important one, but the chariot of Apollo will also be connected against, as we see here, with the swastika as well. So these symbols, as seen in the State Library and throughout Sydney and other places around the world, are very strong, they're very interconnected, they're quite ancient. The Arapacis in Rome, or the Altar of Peace, as well, or by Augustus, who was very much into the golden age of Apollo and liked to portray himself in that type of light. We have repeated references, so for instance we see, well, the swan, the bull, these are references to Zeus, Apollo the son of Zeus, also well, the twins here being Artemis and Apollo, but the swastika, acanthus scrolling, and the Corinthian type references to again the canthus and those colonnades there. Now in the Golden Arse by Ovid, or Metamorphosis, it's referenced many times, and especially connected with Apollo, but also we'll see in the Mithraic cults where various reliefs, now there are multiple symbols, Apollo, Artemis, Diana, but also, well, the torches there, but most importantly the acanthus leaf decorations around the outside. But it's not just exclusively to that particular region, because also in the Buddhist world, Greco-Buddhist architecture, they incorporated this plan and the Corinthian columns into their architecture, so it's really carries through quite some time. But there are many more, much more ancient than this period. But the Green Man, which is typically in cathedrals, but you'll see it again in older temples, very much connected again to this same sort of symbolism. And to go back to also connected with Osiris, has the description of by Strabo. So for instance, on the west bank of the Nile near the Bent Pyramid, there was a sanctuary there for Osiris, and a city itself called Acanthus as well. Many others now. There's also, for instance, there's a city in ancient Greece which was called Acanthos. Acanthos in Greece has a few interesting connections. Now, for instance, the way that people were buried there as a link to the story of the origin of the Corinthian order, but also the coinage there. So you'll see the symbol of the city was a bull and being consumed by a lion, and it's an interesting story if you want to have a look at that. But the use of the swastika as well in this particular town, so you have references. Acanthus grew on that particular location, which is one of the reasons it got its name, but also the same symbology connecting over and over again. And again, it's the same. So the State Library in New South Wales in Australia, it's a world away from this, thousands of years away from this, and yet the symbols carry through, and you'll find them in all parts of the world, especially those connected with occult groups, and especially the most well-known being the Freemasons. Elsewhere in the library we have these corbels surrounding, again another reference in the State Library of New South Wales to this particular symbol. And on this day that I visited, there was also, amongst many others, there was a few interesting displays, including this silver candelabra. Now the figures around there as well will connect back to this same method, but the acanthus leaf decorations in there as well. Also, just out of interest, that particular day they had an exhibition regarding gardening, but and a few other topics. But Paul Tolan mapping was here. That's a reference to that 32 and 33. And there was some references to town planning, and there's just like a nice little graphic regarding the importance of the way you design a town, and the way you design these type of things is also about connecting and attracting people to these particular type of places. While on the floor of the library they had this nice little quote from Cicero: "If you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need." And that's one of my favourite Cicero quotes, but I think the most potent, important one by him was, "To know of nothing of what happened before you were born is to forever remain a child." And I think that's one of the very important truths. And you need to know what happened before, so that you know where you are, and so that you know where you're going. And that's one of the points of naology, the sacred study of buildings, and why they wrote in this particular language. It's much more than might immediately come to mind. It's not about individuals grandizing themselves. It's about creating a community. It's about creating a focal point for this community, and the use of these ancient symbols, which go back through to basically the beginnings of recorded time. And there's much more to these particular topics, much more. This has been a very quick just touching on it. And with that, I'll finish the video. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you found something informative in here, and have a good one.